I would like to welcome Harman for his first, an exclusive first online Zoom presentation. Thank you, Harman.
This is the first time in my life I've been on a machine like this, so I'm pretty terrified. But fortunately, Mrs. Murtagh is standing by as the chief technologist. So we'll have the first picture, Naomi, please.
Absolutely, coming up.
Well, my friends, this little talk or discussion is about the Hodson Bay Regattas, and the Lough Yacht Club Regatta was held at Hodson Bay for 13 years between 1957 and 1969. And I think I'm the only person alive who attended all of those regattas, although of course a great many of the people who are listening to this attended some of them. But I actually attended all, and I'm not sure that anybody else did. It was also the first time I ever sailed in a Shannon One Design at the 1957 regatta. So why did we go to Hodson Bay? Well, there was the attraction of the hotel facilities in contrast to the very bleak clubhouse at Ballyglass as it was then, which had of course no bar except a place to serve tea, and in not very good conditions, I may add, and extremely primitive loos, sort of reminiscent of the First World War, thunder boxes and trenches. So it was felt that the facilities were poor and we didn't have the capital to do anything with them. So in 1954, the club passed a resolution to move to Hodson Bay, and I'll explain how that came about in a minute. Nothing happened for various reasons until 1957. And then the lake was very high and a jetty was underwater at Ballyglass. So that forced the move on us. And so that's why we moved across. And it was a very good move at the time because the club sailors were mostly aging. And the club was rather stuffy in atmosphere, and because the sailors were aging and because not very little new blood was coming in, it was kind of verging on stagnation. So some sort of renaissance was needed, a new start. And many felt it wouldn't happen at Ballyglass. And so that's why we moved across the lake for that period, 1957 to 1969. And this is Hodson Bay at the time. You can see the original hotel there on the left. It was a 5-bay, is it 5-bay? Yes, a country house. And then it had been acquired by Paddy Lenihan about 1950, turned it into a small hotel, and arranged for the county council to build a fairly good, long, narrow jetty at right angles to the shore. And you can see it there on the right, the concrete part. It lapsed into timber further on. And you can see also the very rough shore and the small number of cars and the small number of people, that were there. So it was a kind of fairly quiet shore, but with this very fine, fine building compared to what we were used to in Ballyglass. So the next picture, please. And the location, as you probably all know, the yacht club is marked over there on the right, and then Hudson's Bay, you go up round Caroran Point and you come into Hudson's Bay, and it's there in that very sheltered bay on the left, on the Roscommon shore. It had the added advantage that it wasn't like Ballyglass on the lee shore, but it was on the weather shore. And so it was sheltered, very sheltered place to sail, and a very good, nice moorings along the jetty. Although the holding ground in Hodson Bay is sand, and it's not very good if you have to anchor. Also, there was a good new road out from Athlone. And right in front of where we were sailing, you looked out on this massive expanse of water, but you could sail around the very sheltered bay, or you could go out a bit further into the lake. So there were great physical advantages to it. Next slide, please. And the probably a driving force for us going was the gentleman in the middle here. That's Sean Lemass on the left and Dean Crowe on the right. But the gentleman in the middle is the late Paddy Lenihan. And he was in many ways Mr. Athlone at the time. But he was the proprietor of the Hodson Bay, and he was a tremendous, lively, vibrant, welcoming, warm personality, as well as very bright and intelligent man. So he was a marvelous host, and he gave us a huge welcome, and he owned the whole U Point area, and so he offered us a site there to build a club as well. And the hotel, there were very few people around, very few people staying in it, so it was a virtual clubhouse for the regatta. And you could go in and out, and you could get meals if you wanted, and drink in the bar. And Paddy was a very generous, warm host. And of course, he was also a Shannon One Design owner, in that he owned the 67, though he only ever did third hand in her at these regattas, and that only for the first few. But he was a great and genial and wonderful host, and the whole setup was very attractive while he was there. Next slide, please. Next slide, Naomi. Hello.
Hello, sorry, hang on. We have minor technical difficulties. Remote control.
Now, the key, other key physical thing in the operation was Sid Shine's barge, the Fox, and she functioned as the committee boat. The regatta was run from her decks, from her wheelhouse, which in those days, I think it's the case in this picture, I'm not sure, but in those days it was much smaller than it was subsequently. It was just a bench with the wheel in front of the bench and a little shelf in front of that, and that was the starter's hut, committee room, and so on. And as well as that, the Fox provided a lot of accommodation for the sailors. Maybe 12 or 14 people would sleep on her for the duration of the regatta. I'm not sure exactly how many were on it, but I have cruised on the Fox when there were 17 people on it. So Sid was a wonderful host. And this is Sid Shine himself, and he was really the key man in the operation. He organized the regattas, and he was a decisive person. He was able to take a decision and drive it through, you know, and insist on it being carried out. And he was very committed to encouraging young people to use the river and to sail. So he introduced people like Jimmy Reid, myself, Peter Mulvihill, Derry McMahon, Teddy Knight, Edwin Hunter, and others to a greater or lesser extent were the products. I'm thinking of people at the Hodson Bay now. There were others later, but we were the products, you know, to a greater or lesser extent of his encouragement. I mean, Jimmy Reid's uncle Tommy Gallagher was a sailor, and I came from a sort of sailing family anyway. So you know, it wasn't entirely Sid, but there's no doubt he had a huge influence on it. And he led and organized and drove the regattas. And I think it's fair to say that Shannon One Design sailing and possibly the yacht club itself would have died at the time without his commitment, and indeed his financial support in, you know, providing petrol for the outboards and providing a crash boat. Well, I don't think we had a crash boat, but a boat that would be available in the event of a crash, and that sort of thing. And so there he is in the wheelhouse of the Fox, and you can see it's quite a small area from which the regatta operated. Now, Naomi, next slide, please. And this is the regatta about 1959, 58, 59, I think. And we attracted some IDRA sailors from Clontarf, because we had a few IDRA 14s in the club, which were built locally. Tommy Gallagher built Atomic, Sid Shine built Acidic, and Billy English built, was it a Willing or Ability, I think. And anyway, so they came down and sailed. I don't know their names except the guy with the cup on the extreme left. That's Michael O'Kelly. And then if you look at the people standing, there's a man with a cap. Then there's Tom Feehily, who sailed with Lionel Lister, who's the man with the tie beside him. And I was their third hand, and it was a terrific experience and great fun. Then there's a man I don't know. Then there's Raymond Costello. His father owned the Snark, a converted barge. Then Reggie Goodbody. Then Peter Dobbs. Now, many of you will not remember Peter Dobbs, especially if you're younger people, but in fact, he was a terrific guy, a man, you know, a lovable, lovely man whose life didn't turn out all that well for him, but he was a terribly loyal, honourable person, and he always came to the regattas, and he came in his mini van, and he used to sleep in the van, but because it wasn't long enough, he slept with his feet out the back doors, which were open. Then there's a guy who could be Johnny Hooper, I'm not totally sure. Then there's Jody Gallagher, who would be Jimmy Reed's uncle. Then there's Louis Courtney. Then there's Tony Knight. Then there's, I'm not sure which is which, but one of the Glennons. Then there's Jim Killeen. Then there's another Glennon. Then almost hidden, there's Sid. He should really be sitting in the middle of the front row. And then I think Michael Goodbody over on the right. And if you come over to the left again for the sitting down people, there's a couple, 3 guys from the IDRAs, then Zena Sherlock, Tommy Gallagher, Betty Goodbody and Bunny Goodbody, and I'll come back to Bunny, Susan McGann, Colonel Hooker, and I'll come back to him, Alf Delany, Doreen Darcy, my mother, and Francis McGann. And then in the front row, left to right, there's Desmond Simmons, Edwin Hunter, the late Jimmy Reed, myself, Peter Delany, the late Kenneth Simmons, June Simmons, and Arthur McGann as the little guy kneeling at his daddy's knee there, subsequently one of the crew of the St. Brendan. That's the whole regatta. So you can see that numbers were small, and I'll say something about that later on. Now, next slide, please. Well, I mentioned Bunny Goodbody, and he was the other key person in the revival of the Shannon One Design class. He was in Lough Derg really, or well, certainly at the outside Lough Ree, he was the driving force in its revival. He was a very larger than life personality, pictured there characteristically with a drink and a fag and enjoying a joke at a wedding or something. I remember he was wearing that very same suit at Edwin Hunter's wedding, and I said to Bunny Goodbody, he was known as Bunny, Llewellyn Marcus was his name. I said to Bunny, God, Bunny, that's a fairly ancient suit. And he looked at mine and he said, at least it's my own. So he had the better of that exchange. But he was a great person to bring other people into the fleet. He brought in his cousin, Oliver Goodbody, who late had a succession of boats. He brought in Jackie Jackson and Tim Jackson from Mullingar. They came in because they were related to the Goodbodies, and others as well. So he was a huge force in the whole operation. And he and Sid kind of ran the Shannon One Design class together in the 1950s and into the 1960s. He was a fine sailor. He could be a difficult, spiky character, but I certainly was very fond of him, and I greatly appreciate what he did for the class. And I remember him and Betty with great affection. Now, next slide, please. Yes. Just before going on to that, I want to say, in case I forget, that we were very weak at the time. I mean, sailing in Lough was clinging on by its fingernails, you know, and Lough Regatta was after Lough Derg Regatta, so it was the 3rd week in August. And when we would go to Lough Derg Regatta, you know, I remember many times going round the boats and saying, would you be considering coming to Lough Ree, or can I persuade you to come to Lough Ree, or words to that effect. And I must say we got a very good response. They didn't, of course, come every year, but I remember Bertie Waller coming, George Henry coming. John Lefroy came every year once he got started. He came every year. Peter Huskinson was another regular. The Tottenhams came on the Venus. George's father and his uncles. George and his brothers weren't even in contemplation in those days. And later we welcomed Tony Dean, Hardress Waller, and Martin Maguire, and indeed others. I'm afraid I didn't keep any notes, so I've probably forgotten other people who came. But we certainly got great support when we needed it from Lough Derg Yacht Club, and I have never forgotten that. So I say no more on that particular score. Now, this is the Hodson Bay again, and accommodation was on the Fox, or else people had tents along the shore there, or they had caravan, and they had some caravans as well as time wore on. The McNamara's caravan used to be there just in the foreground. Bunny Goodbody used to park on the lawn, his caravan, under that tree, the big tree there that's, you know, in the center of the picture on the lawn. And Teddy Knight, when he came with Pauline, he had a caravan a little further up the way and parked in it. I remember the Mains coming to the regatta, and believe it or not, they were very shy and reserved little fellows, and they had a tent, and they were allowed to stay over in their tent. And it was a magnificent tent, which we all felt was worthy of a sheik in the desert. So it got the nickname of Chattel Arab. And they parked, being shy fellows, way big distance away. And anyway, after a day or two, the whole regatta went down, picked up their tent, and brought it up to the shore there in front of the hotel. And socially, they never looked back after that. I think it's fair to say. So well, as time went on, Paddy Lenihan sold the Hodson Bay. He lived in it for a while, and things were not too bad. But then he left it, and then the welcome was no longer there. And so we used to go up to, at lunchtime, up to O'Donoghue's pub in Kiltoom, and we'd have a few drinks before lunch, and same in the evening. And there was membership of a club. I can't remember what club it was, but anyway, you had to join the club. You had to hop up on the counter without putting your hands on the counter. You sort of did a jump and a turn, and if you landed on the counter, then you were a member of the club. And then in the evenings, we go back to the shore after the pub closed, and we'd all pile into McNamara's caravan for coffee, and people would hang in through the windows and everything. So that was, the atmosphere was very close and warm and friendly and so on. Hodson Bay was a great wedding venue at the time, so occasionally our activities would be interrupted by the bride and groom having their photograph taken and so on. And on one dramatic occasion, the bride was stung by a wasp. And they said, "Oh, the bride's been stung by a wasp," to which Bunny Goodbody famously said, "It'll be nothing to the sting she'll experience later tonight." I'm not sure if I should tell that story, but anyway, it's a true one. So that was the hotel. Now the next slide, please. And this is the scene. I'm not actually sure that this is a regatta scene, but if it's not, it gets the atmosphere anyway. You can see the Fox is at the jetty, and she looks as though she's halfway down the jetty, but that's because the jetty came out at right angles to the shore, and then it has a bend on it from the bow of the Fox up towards the northeast. So in order to have the line at right angles to the shore, I'll come back to the line in a minute, the Fox was parked there. And that's the Snark over on the extreme left, and the Francesca is in the middle. And then there are a few Shannons rigging and so on. I don't know if it's actually a regatta scene or a weekend, you know, a bit of weekend sailing, but howsoever, it gets the idea. And the line was the two masts on the Fox, and then a distance buoy out further. And the course was pretty well around the bay. We had a beating start if the line afforded it, or a reaching start if it didn't, which was frequently the case. And we often usually sail down indeed to a mark down in the corner, you know, under the golf club. And so it was quite a short first leg. And the marks were wooden crosses that floated with a brush handle sticking up, or a dowel sticking up through the middle, and a flag on that, and stays of wire holding it all up. And we would lay these then with a heavy weight somewhere in the appropriate places. And they didn't move or very much anyway. It was sort of fixed marks. And the course then went around that. And the starter was in the wheelhouse, except that for the start, and I'll come to him in a minute, he came outside and he fired his gun. The number of boats to begin with, the first regatta I was there was six. But by the time we left Hodson Bay, we were doing much better, and we were maybe getting 12 or 14 or something like that at its height. So very small by modern standards, but nonetheless, it was lively, and the competition, which I'll say later, was very good. At night time, the boats were pulled up on the shore because the water was high, especially in the first years, and it was sort of sandy and grassy, so it wasn't too difficult. Now the next slide, please.
I'm just going to, sorry Harman, I'm not able to mute everyone. Can I just ask, can everyone check that they can mute themselves so we can do properly? And next slide. Okay.
And this is the honorary starter, Colonel Eric Hooker, late of the Highland Light Infantry. Eric was an Englishman, and he was a wonderful, lovely man. Down in Lough, where he lived, he was married to Mary Hooker, Mary Tisdale. He married in there, so to speak. And down there, he was rather respectable, you know. But when he got to Lough, he let what was left of his hair down. And he was great fun, great character. And he had a marvelous empathy with all the growing number of young people who were very, very fond of him indeed. And he was an efficient starter, but he never, ever got into a boat. He always did everything from the shore. He was not a boating type. And he stayed in various places, but I think chiefly in a little cabin on the Fox. So he was a great support to us, and we could be sure that the sailing was, you know, the starting and all that was professional, and the finishing and the scoring was too. And he was there. I came to every regatta, I think, in Hodson Bay, and he was great fun and a great character. One of the things that, as I said, we had been offered a site for a clubhouse round the shore by Paddy Lenihan, but we never got beyond putting a railway carriage on it, or an old railway wagon on it. And this was known as Fort Shine after Sid. And it was a place that some people stayed during the regatta in rather primitive circumstances. But on one occasion, Martin Maguire, who was a great character from Limerick, came there. And Martin had a dinner party to which Paddy Lenihan and Colonel Hooker were the guests. And they had a pork stew in a big pot and much to drink. And at the end of the evening, anyway, none of them were able to go home. Well, Martin was at home, so they all slept in Fort Shine. And Paddy Lanahan, true to his hotel training, put his shoes outside the door so that the boots would clean them during the night. But of course, when he went looking for his shoes in the morning, it had rained and they were full of water. And the permanent memory to that night is the lid of the saucepan in which the pork stew was cooked, which is a sort of novelty prize, as you know, called the Grunter's Plate, after the pig. Next slide, please. Now, this is actually Sid sailing in the 32, but and I have no pictures really of the sailing, but I wanted to show you what conditions were like. They're flying, going along, good stiff breeze, hanging out. It's a cotton sail, although Terrelin sails were coming in at the time, but there were still some cotton sails. And you can see that the boat has no buoyancy in it, nor have the sailors any life jackets. And that was the universal rule in those days. It wasn't a rule. I mean, you could wear a life jacket, but it was the universal practice. And I'm not sure that we even had a crash boat. I think, an extremis, a boat might come out from the Fox to rescue you, but I don't think a crash boat cruised around with us. I could be wrong about that, but certainly no buoyancy and no personal buoyancy either. But nobody, we hadn't any fatalities, I'm glad to say. The racing itself was quite hot. You may say 6 or 7 boats, but you had Alf, who was a really topping good sailor. You had Bunny, who was his great rival, and you had the 50, sailed by Lionel and Tom Feely, Lionel Lister and Tom Feely, with Murtagh as little third hand. And they were very strong and competitive as well. And so those 3 boats tended to be at the top of the fleet. But the others, Sid and Tommy Gallagher, I'm thinking of, and also the 33, the Milligan's boat, which I remember Walter Milligan, I think, was at the first few regattas there, but then his health wasn't great, and then Joe and Lola took over. Lola Milligan, who married Joe Leach, so Joe and Lola Leach took over, and they sailed competitively as well. Everybody said, oh, it's a light day today, the 33 is sure to go well. And of course, as the years went on and new boats joined the fleet, the competition greatly increased. And I mean, a really outstanding sailor from Lough Derg was Peter Huskinson, a really, really good sailor. So it was, and he did a huge amount to develop the class and push it forward as well. The funniest incident that I remember, well, there were a few, but was when Lionel Lister had a sister called Dolly, who was, she was a fairly, now I got on with her well, but she was a fairly abrasive character. But anyway, we had a ladies' race. And so about 6 or 7 boats lined up, and it was a reaching start. And we headed down for the first mark down in the corner under the golf club. And Dolly was sailing the 50, and Tom was on the sheet. He ran the 50, you see. The Listers just helmed her and owned the boat and paid the bills. But Tom dominated from the centre, and I was the third hand. I didn't see anything except what I was told. Anyway, we started in the ladies' race, and we heard the colonel shout, 50's over the line. But we were all reaching together, and we were in the middle of the fleet. And Tom was very competitive, squirmed in his seat, and he looked below and he looked above, and there was nowhere to turn. The other boats were on top of us. And finally, Bunny was beside us. And finally, he looked under the sail and he said, Jez, Bunny, you wouldn't do this to us, would you? And Bunny looked back under and he said, but Jez, Tom, I would, and I'd love to. And they brought us right down to the first mark before we could go back to start. well, Dolly was ready to beat Tom with the tiller handle, and I don't think she ever sailed with us again. I remember Margaret coming down, and she was Margaret Delany, and she was a great little character. I guess she was maybe, I don't know, about 12 at the time, but the dad, she held him the 37, and it was great stuff, but unfortunately, the Alf must have been a bit slow on the sheet because they turned over down in that corner as well. But that wouldn't be the Helms woman's problem fault, I'm sure. So those were some of the incidents. But the sailing was very close, very competitive, and I can only remember one protest, which was over a team race. And I remember Sid and Bunny agreeing that there'd be no more team racing. It was too divisive, and there never has been. We tried it once in 1972, and it proved to be divisive once more, very divisive. So we haven't done it. In modern times. Speaking as a greybeard, I wouldn't recommend it, but it's new generations have different ideas. And then at the end of the regatta, we had a dinner in the hotel, a simple little dinner on the Saturday night, and Sid then would make a speech and present prizes. And if you were expected to dress smartly for the dinner. If you had a reefer, you were expected to wear it. Sid used to say it was important, he said, to have a little bit of formality. And we'd have a good turnout for the dinner and the prize giving, and then fill the cups afterwards and so on. I remember Greta and Bertie Baird used to always come to the dinner. Greta was an Adamson and from Westmeath, and she had old family associations with the club. I can't say I ever remember her sailing, but perhaps she did. I'm not sure. So those were the years there, and they were great years. And then we decided that the more people were coming to the Hodson Bay, the jetty was getting more crowded. There were speedboats and motorboats and cruisers beginning to come in and out. There was a lot of cars. It was no longer comfy to park your caravan or pitch your tent on the shore. And we decided that the Lough was approaching its bicentenary, and we decided that really there was no future for us in the Hodson Bay. Oh, there was two other things. Paddy Lenihan sold some property where those chalets and so on were developed as you go out towards U Point. And he asked us, he said, if you're not building the clubhouse, I want my bit of land back. So we lost the possibility of a clubhouse site, and we weren't building, so it was fair enough. And we did make an approach to the golf club to buy their old clubhouse when they moved up on top of the hill, because their old clubhouse was down beside the lake, but they wouldn't sell it to us anyway. So that was that. So back to Ballyglass, and for the bicentenary regatta. And I should say, of course, the hotel had changed hands, and the welcome that Paddy Lenihan extended was no longer there. Now, just next picture, please. So this is the program for the bicentenary regatta, and I think it demonstrates really the success of Hodson Bay. Just look at the list of officers there. Commodore Sid Shine, Vice Commodore yours truly. What was I then? Something in my 20s still anyway. Rear Commodore Tommy Gallagher, Honorary Secretary Edwin Hunter, Honorary Assistant Secretary Peter Mulvihill, Honorary Treasurer Anne McNamara, Starter Colonel Hooker, Honorary Sailing Secretary Jimmy Reid. We all give ourselves fancy esquires, you see, after our names. And then John Kineen is the representative of the juniors, and I'll say something about that as well. So you can see that already the idea of getting new people to come in and take over the responsibility for the club was, you know, really succeeding and driving through. I should have said that when we introduced the optimists sometime in the mid 1960s or so, they sailed at Lough at Hodson Bay Regattas for a couple of years as well. I'm not sure which year it started, and they finished with us and moved back. But they sailed at the regatta. They sailed at the regatta as well. So I think the Hodson Bay Regattas were a great success. They were a great, you know, social and fun success, but they also eased a lot of new people into sailing, especially young people. They kept sailing alive and ultimately stimulated its revival. And a lot of new boats were added to the fleet at that time, from number 72 to number 94 came in. Now, not all of them sailed in Lough, but a great many of them did. Next slide, please. And finally, what you've all been waiting for. What about the normal people sort of thing? I suppose all of you know what normal people is. Well, one of the great attractions of the Shannon is the freedom it offers, especially if you're a teenager or in your early 20s. Now, my lips are necessarily sealed about the details of various relationships that went on. But at the end of it all, it's public knowledge that Philip Mayne married Vivian Goodbody, I married Anne McNamara, and John Lefroy married Sandra Smith. And John Lefroy married Sandra Smith exactly 50 years ago today. So that's that side of the operation. So if there are any questions or comments, I'll try and handle them. Otherwise, that's all I have to say.
Harmy, it's Peter Delany.
Yeah.
We always had a bell tent, which we put on the tennis court. Right. And regardless of whether anybody complained or not, the pegs were driven into this tennis court with great pomp. And I have great memories of terribly wet summers, because we did it later in the year. It was done at the end of August and rather early in August.
Yeah, about the third week.
We were getting a lot more of the autumnal type weather. But one particular occasion, with one of these passing wet days, the rain was so bad, the pegs came out and this tent came down on all of us. And we abandoned the stables in the hotel for the rest of the week.
Yeah, I remember the bell tent, and then was it the Elizabeth?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. But one other little thing, Harmy, I think, and it may have involved your dad. When we first went over there, there was a big thing about the swimming club at the at Ballyglass, who wanted control of the place. And there was some suggestion that the swimming club were going to dispossess us. And we were moving over to Hodson Bay as sort of as the alternative starting point.
Yeah, well, there's something in that, you know, that the yacht club was increasingly taken over by swimmers. And the idea that to fund the move to a new club, the idea was to sell the old club to the county council as a swimming place. The county council may have nibbled at the bait, but they didn't in the end take the hook.
Just as well. Yeah.
Anything else?
Oh my God.
Philip, hang on, I'll unmute you. Philip, you're going to have to press unmute. There we go.
You mentioned Kiltoom and jumping up onto the bar. I think that was membership of Lough Corrib Yacht Club.
Well, perhaps, yeah.
And it was there that our father, because I see the brother there, to jump up backwards onto the bar. I think it took him a few attempts to do it, and subsequently bought the 83 after that, having joined Lough Corrib and then Lough Ree. So,
yes. Well, I remember when the Mains came the first year, Father Main sailed the boat, David Main did the sheet, and Philip was third hand. Then as the years went on, there was a sort of gradual, Father Main did the sheet, and so on. And finally Father Main was third hand, and then Father Main was gone. And hefty young men appeared in his place. He moved just up towards the bow and then disappeared. For 3 or 4 years.
I think the only time that I remember Reggie's father, the good Bunny, lost for words was one year when he asked us where we were sailing, and we had our cousin Rosemary sailing with us, and we were up in a little tent where we had Chattel Arab before, and he said, you know, where are you all staying? And the brother said, oh, we're up there in the tent. He said, what? All together? Oh, yes. He said, yes, the three of us, Philip and I are either side, and Rosemary sleeping between us. And I don't think Bunny, he was completely lost for words.
He wasn't often lost for words.
No, he was then.
I can remember on one occasion on a screaming run from Hodson Bay back towards Ballyglass, and several boats capsized, and one of them was Walter Levy. And Walter, if you remember, always sailed with a sports jacket and a trilby hat and a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. Anyway, the boat disappeared gracefully into the water, and like all Shannons, it floats you, but at a fairly low level. And Walter, just as we passed, put his hand into his pocket, pulled out the wet cigarettes, took one out and put it into his mouth. Great days, great fun.
He didn't approve of the move to Hodson Bay, Walter, and he wouldn't sail there. But he continued to build boats and generally take an interest.
I wonder, Harman, could you recount the infamous story? It wasn't actually a regatta, but we had the Christmas dinners in the yacht club, in the Hodson's Bay. And there was I think it was a presentation to George. Would you just like to recount?
Well, I wasn't actually there. I was in America for it, but it was a presentation of a donkey to Colonel Hooker, and in gratitude for his effort. And the donkey was known as Soda, after the Shannon One Designs Association, and also a vital ingredient to good Scotch. That's all. I wasn't actually there for the presentation, but that's what happened. Yeah. We used to. I mean, there was an attempt to sail at Christmas on several years. Hello.
Yeah. Yes, I remember that. Anyone there? No.
Yes, they're all here.
Oh, oh yes, no, I remember the attempts at sailing at Christmas, but I do remember the presentation to Colonel Hooker of the donkey, and the donkey being brought into the restaurant, into the hotel. Mm-hmm. And I remember the Grunter's plate. That Colonel Hooker used to make the handicap beforehand. You had to drink a pint of Guinness or something beforehand, and then go to your boat. And I remember the first time that I did it, that they went and locked all the doors and the windows, so you couldn't get out. And I remember we got out of they hadn't locked the lavatory windows, so we got out of that. And I remember running down the jetty, and I remember my crew had the boat turned around so the sail was full. She was she was asked to the wind.
Mm.
And as I ran down the jetty, I said, "Okay, let her go now." And I leapt for the back of the boat, but I wasn't quite fast enough. I only managed to grab hold of the tiller, so but of the rudder. But it was fun. They were fun times. They were lovely regattas.
They were.
Yeah. Mm.
And I think they were very important for the rehabilitation of the class as well. You know, it was a completely different atmosphere at them, of young people and fun and sort of not too. Well, the sailing was serious, but I mean the atmosphere was much more relaxed and friendly and everything.
Yeah. Mm. And it was fine without buoyancy and well, I think we always had to wear life jackets in my time. But
no, we didn't initially wear life jackets there. We might have worn them. I think it came in while we were there. But initially there were no life jackets. The first few years.
Mm. Oh, right, yeah.
I remember the resolution. It was Squirrel Green proposed it. I remember the resolution to make life jackets compulsory being passed. And so it must have been sometime in the 1960s, I suppose, yeah.
Yes, yeah, must have been, yes. Squirrel and Joyce Green in the 45.
Yeah.
Yes. And they had a lovely caravan. They went everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. She only died a few years ago.
I think so, yes.
She lived to 100 and something, I think, yeah.
Not sure.
Mm.
Harman, Oh, sorry about that. Harman, you forgot the lovely trips up Lough with the Venus.
No, I wasn't on those, John.
You missed.
He's denying.
You missed it. Taking off and going into the middle distance in the middle of the bloody night, and full of drink and enthusiasm and song, etc., etc. And Sid, if come to that, Sid sings songs on board the Fox as well.
Yeah, that's of course was another dimension of Sid, was that he was a musician, and he used to bring his piano accordion up to the pub, but certainly he would play for us, and we'd all sing. The sing songs were I forgot to say something about them. The sing songs are an important part of the operation, and we had a number of bad singers who didn't sing at all, like myself and Jimmy Reid, but we also had a couple of very good singers. And one of those was Peter Mulvihill, and the other was John Fletcher. And they were both good singers. There may have been other, Bunny used to sing, but he's perhaps had been better in his youth. but I can't, there were probably other singers that were good, but I particularly remember Peter Mull and John Fletcher.
I always remember Martin Maguire and singing The Juice of the Barley. That was
The Juice of the Barley.
Yeah.
He did, that's right, yeah.
Harman, hi there. Do you want to speak for a moment about Sid's view on us going to the yacht club from Hodson Bay?
Yeah, well, he didn't really approve because he felt it was a reversal of the policy that he had inaugurated and run successfully. He didn't really approve. He wasn't in favor of the return for but he went along with it, to give him his due, but he didn't really approve. No, but it had reached that. I mean, we actually looked. We actually looked at other places on the lake. Could we run a regatta from Cousin Point, for example, and stuff like that? But we decided Cousin Point wouldn't work because there's a hell of a sea very often when where its location when you come out into the lake there. So I remember we looked at that, and we came to the conclusion that whether we liked it or not, the only solution was to go back to Ballyglass. And we had been using it to some extent, and we had worked on the facilities. Peter Peter Mull was engineer, and he knew how to put in things like Armstrong junctions, which are a vital aspect of sewage, and stuff like that. So we improved the loos and stuff, and we worked away on the club, put a new roof on and all sorts, all ourselves, you know. Tommy Gallagher got two of these big beams that they use on the pylons, and they had spare ones in the ESB yard in Athlone. So we arranged for the ESB to drop these two out to the club, and then we got them up. The roof had to come off the clubhouse, and then we got these up onto the roof, and we dug holes in the wall, and they're still holding up the roof of the old clubhouse, I'm sure. Yeah. So we put a new roof on, and we had the starter's hut, and then later on the jetty was raised and one thing or another, but that's not really about Hodson Bay, so I'll pass. But Georgina was right to raise that. Sid was not very enthusiastic about the return, but he went with it. And by then, Sid used to, you know, he was running his band, and so he often had very late nights, and he expected his crew to have the boat rigged at the end of the jetty before the first race. And woe betide the crew if it wasn't rigged to his satisfaction, if the sail wasn't fully up, or was a bit crooked, or the downhaul wasn't tight, or whatever it might be, or the sheet wasn't rove properly. Woe betide the crew. I graduated with Jimmy to be Sid's crew for some years, and it was fairly rough going. And eventually we were succeeded by very loyal pair, Derry McMahon and Peter Mull, and they sailed with Sid for a good many years. But again, woe betide you if the boat wasn't rigged and sitting at the end of the jetty. I always thought it's a very good model for crews to have the boat rigged and ready for the skipper at the end of the jetty, so he can just step on board and drive off.
Harman, that's where Dad learned it. So because he had a similar motto.
How to get us home.
Yes, well, that's where he learned it, undoubtedly. Because originally Jimmy sailed with Tommy Gallagher, his uncle. But I think Tommy wasn't perhaps in good health or something, and then he graduated to sail with Sid along with me. So first year I did the sheet, and Jimmy did the I think third hand, and then I was demoted to third hand, and Jimmy was promoted to sheet. And we had that for some years, and then eventually I got my own boat, and Jimmy perhaps reverted to sailing with Tommy or whatever, or maybe sailed Tommy. I can't remember really, but he carried on sailing in some form or other anyway. Yeah.
Yes, I had the opposite.
I've got a little bit of a memory from 1961, actually. I remember being there. I was 18. I'd left school, was about to go up to university, and I was standing in the bar in Hodson Bay Hotel, and Bunny introduced me to his cousin from England, who was John Marriage. And I have a feeling that was the first year that John went over there. He liked, obviously, he met all the people through Bunny. And as I remember, he interrogated me about going up to Cambridge. I remember the old conversation very vividly, because I went to a new college at Cambridge and called Churchill College. And John was with two people from the village where he came from, Bassingbourne in Hertfordshire. And John said, which college are you going to? He said, I was at Trinity Hall. Oh, yes, that's very good. And then the chap next to him, I said, I'm going to Churchill College. He said, no, you're not. I said, what do you mean? He said, it's not built yet. I'm a builder, and I'm building it. Which was absolutely true. It wasn't really built. But anyway, I have a memory. So I have a feeling that John, from then onwards, started to come. But that was 1961, I can tell you.
Yeah, and he was very regular attender, of course, then at the regattas thereafter.
John Marriage came over to Drummondere for his honeymoon. We lived in Drummondere at the time, and he brought Caroline over, and that's when I first met him. And They were a great company. He was a great asset to the whole fleet. Harman, thank you very much. Excuse me, I have to leave. Thank you.
Bye, Reggie.
Thanks, Reggie.
Hi, Reggie.
Harman, can you hear me?
I can.
Oh yeah, brilliant. Yeah, no, I was listening on my own computer, but no audio or video, so I borrowed Siobhan's computer for just to chat to you. I was delighted to hear about the Grunter plate, because it was actually the first trophy that I ever won in Lough, which was back in 1996, when I went down there in my first car, and I actually slept in the car and everything, beside Philip Main's caravan. I have one of my assistants coming down to me now, who's just been down on the waterfall. But anyway, I'm up here. But yeah, no, I loved all the stories. And you know what the truth of it is that despite the generations, nothing ever changes.
No. Well, we were full of enthusiasm in those days, and I still am, but I don't do anything very actively now. But the great thing is, I mean, the really great thing is to see young people running the class now and even having more enthusiasm and more drive for it. So it's wonderfully encouraging for an old grey beard, not that I have a beard like myself.
I heard John Lefroy's comment earlier, full of drink and enthusiasm. Well, there's a motto for life.
Harman, I don't know if you're receiving this. We're speaking from the cloud somewhere. It's Alan and Justine from
yes, I recognise you, Alan, despite your beard.
Anyway, well, while you were talking about Bunny, hello, Reggie, one little memory comes back to me. We were sailing out of Hodson Bay years and years ago, and Tim Jackson was sailing with his father. Can't remember his first name. He was Dr. Johnson. Jackie, sorry, yeah. Anyway, they were sailing around Beam Island direction, and suddenly one of the Ken Simmons appeared on a port tack and sailed for the two of them, and of course yelled starboard at them. Whereupon the Jacksons capsized and had to be rescued, and they were taken into the Hodson Bay. We came in a few minutes later. Bunny ran down the chest. Did you see that incident? I said, oh yeah, we did, yeah. Ah, well, he said, right, I'd like you to go into Athlone for me. He says, and report this incident to the guards. They will put that man arrested for attempted. Anyway, needless to say, we didn't, and he didn't. So, I don't know. And we see hockey there as well. And Peter, do you remember the nice story you had about Donald Leeson and the finish of the race just outside the club? Oh, many years later.
Yes, bigger screen.
Is Peter gone?
Yeah.
Is Peter gone?
I think he's popped out.
Oh yeah, okay.
He's popped out. Oh well, he might pop in again then. He has a good story.
There's one other story, kind of against myself, that I wouldn't mind telling, which is the first boat. Tony Dean was a wonderful asset to the class when he joined. Just great guy, but he bought Peggy Turbott's boat, which was bright yellow in colour and was called the Egg because of her colour. That was her name, the Egg. And anyway, he was sailing at Lough Yacht Club, and we were on a hell of a run. And he was just in front of me. And the next thing was he went over. And there was nothing I had a new boat, or maybe it was a year or two old, but there was nothing I could do except crash into him. And you know, the boat was filling with water at the time, so she wasn't taking I mean, it was a terrible wallop that she got, his boat, and we just passed him anyway, didn't kill him. And I always remember a piece of yellow plank floating past me, which was part of the egg. And when we got ashore, Tony was very good about it, and I was so sorry that it happened, although I couldn't do anything about it. But you know, you didn't want to break up someone's boat. And anyway, the unkind other people said, "Oh, Harman, you scrambled the egg out there." Anyway, she was repaired, and she lived to fight another day. That was
Harman, that was the same week as you mentioned when I capsized the Kiwi.
Yes.
For some reason, none of my brothers were at the regatta, so I was too small to sheet, so I was steering, and Father was on the sheet, and it was a running start off the Fox down into the bay, and we jibed at the first mark, and we had a big bolt on between the tiller and the tiller extension, and I actually got the bolt, the nut on the bottom of the boat stuck in the gunnel. And that was why we capsized. It was quite a windy day, so that was fine. We then went on to the next race, and I did exactly the same a second time. So at that stage, Father decided that he needed a proper sheet hand and he needed to steer the boat himself.
Well,
so
I didn't like to say it happened twice, Margaret. Yeah. I was too polite.
You were very polite, Harry.
I think your father had said to us before something about capsizing before this happened, and he said he'd only ever capsized once before, and that was on the first long distance race. But my dad, by the end of the day, he'd capsized 3 times. I never saw him capsize again.
Do you have any final questions or comments?
Well, could Peter Huskinson tell us the story about Donald Gleeson finishing the races outside the yacht club? I'm not sure what year. At Ballyglass. We just saw him coming back from the lavatory.
There he is.
There you are.
Yes. Well, all I remember is sailing with Alan and Justine, and coming down to the finish in Ballyglass, and it was a very, very calm, and it was between ourselves and Teddy Knight, and Donald was sitting there as the officer of the day, and we went to one end of the finishing line, and Teddy went to the other end, and we were halfway across I was sheet handing, and the finishing mark was already behind me when Donald banged the gun and said, "Are you on that, Teddy?" And Teddy was still about half a boat length away from the finish. And I turned to Alan and I said, there's Donald Gleeson for you. The only person who can speak through his arse and his nose at the same time.
That was it. Yeah, exactly. Oh dear.
Glad to see you looking so well, Alan.
Yeah, she's going to put my beard in a minute.
Oh,
For
I
the
got to do
second
something in my
time.
hair too.
Are you guys all up in the yacht club?
No, they're all at home.
You're all at home?
Yeah, it's their only time.
Yeah, everyone's at home.
Like us.
Peter, are you
We're in France.
Yeah, it's a Zoom.
All right.
I'll just get the Zoom thing.
I'm not up to these modern.
Well, I'm only just getting it today.
Oh, right.
Ah.
I don't know. I don't know any top.
Well, it was very successful. Thank you, Harman, very much.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you, Harman.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Harman, thank you so much.
Okay.
Hi, Georgina.
Hi.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Harman. Well, I think we should all congratulate John and Sandra. Hip, hip.
Hooray!
Hooray! Hip, hip.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Oh, there's Sandra.
Apropos of being naked, according to his granddaughter who saw him on Zoom, grandfather hasn't put his clothes on yet.
I still distinctly remember the wedding.
I'm surprised you do, Peter.
And climbing into the boot of the car as you were taken away with.
You fell out at the first traffic light.
Yes, that's right. I was flying out of the first traffic lights. Well, at least I made it that far. and I went home with Tommy Sanders, and he stopped at the green traffic lights. And I said, Tommy, they're green, go. No, he said, oh, I'm waiting for the right shade of green.
That sort of day.
Oh, you wouldn't do that now.
I've never been so pissed at a wedding. I don't know how to go.
Oh, God.
Great, everyone. Thank you very much.
Well done, Naomi.
Thank you.
Well done,
Naomi.
Well done.
Danny.
Bye.
Bye.
Say that.
No.
Thanks again.
Oops.
YouTube.
Yes.